Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar event. My name is Joshua and I'm going to be your presenter today. We're here to talk about our getting ready for meetings, or basically some important accounting reports in Church Windows today. It's promptly 2 p.m. Before we get started, a few things. Forgive me if you've attended before. For those, this is for the benefit of those who have not joined us before. Click the little red arrow at the top right or top left of your webinar control panel to minimize that control panel, get it out of the way, or if you've got a 2-monitor setup, go ahead and drag that off to your second desktop just to get it out of the way. If you have questions, please type those into the questions portion of the webinar control panel. I'm pretty good about keeping an eye on those and seeing what I can't do to answer them during the event. I also I'm pretty good, I think, about repeating the question for everyone's benefit, see what we can't do to get those answered. If I am unable to answer them during the event, I will certainly be happy to see what I can't do to answer them at the end, okay, of the event. If you've at any point seen what you came to see, you can choose the file and exit webinar option. Thank you again all so much in advance for attending. We are recording today's webinar event, and it will be put up on our support center here in the next week or so, 10 days, for further review, should you decide you want to go back there and review that. We might have one on a previous version of Church Windows on this same topic. This is just on our version of accounting 20.17.2. We are sending this out to folks in kind of waves. So if you don't have yours yet and you'd like it, please call us. If not, you'll be getting yours soon. We send out a large batch of those today. But if you think you have been sent it and you haven't received it, please call us. We're happy to look at that for you. Okay. So the workbook that we're taking this from today is A201, pages 22 to 25. It doesn't seem like it's a very detailed topic. It certainly isn't regarding the workbook. But we're going to go ahead and try to stretch it out into as much and talk as much about detail of these reports as we possibly can. So the topic is called Getting Ready for Meetings. Essentially, it's the what we call the big three, or big four, I guess, if you include summary of cash activity. These are the big three. They're the balance sheet, the treasurer's report, fund activity report, and if we really want to add the fourth one in there, it would be the summary of cash activity, or check register, as the case may be, whichever one suits you. These are the reports that we believe are the most commonly distributed for church committees, the ones that provide the most amount of information, prove to be the most helpful. Whatever you decide, these are the ones that we think are the most relevant in the software. There are, of course, a lot of reports in accounting, but we're here to talk about these 3 to 4 primarily today. As we discussed yesterday, there are various ways to access the reports. We can either go to reports here in the middle. Let me get my highlighter out. Reports here. I'm awfully fond of going up to reports and export here at the top. And then when we click on that, it then changes to our various menus of our reports here in the upper left-hand corner. Hopefully everybody should be able to see those okay. All right. And that's frequently how I do it. I rarely use the multiple reports button here in the middle. When I want to access a single report, I'll use frequently it's my preferred way of doing it is going up to reports, say financial up here in the upper left. And here we have access to, again, the big three: balance sheet, fund activity report, and treasurer's report. Okay. So the one we're going to talk about first is our balance sheet. It is our in other worlds or accounting worlds or for-profit world, that might be also labeled our statement of financial position. But basically, it is our balance sheet with our balance sheet equation that is our total assets equals liabilities plus fund balance. It is basically points to a single point in time instead of a period of time, okay? And that's what it states at the bottom of page 22 on the workbook, A201, page 22, about the balance sheet. There is not a range of dates here. We run it through a particular month or through a particular date. Okay, so it again is only a single point in time, not a range of time. Okay. And as the top of page 23 indicates, it is our formula for the balance sheet is total assets equals total liabilities plus fund balance. I mean, it doesn't matter how you kind of paint that equation, total fund balance, minus or plus liabilities equals total assets. You can paint the equation in a variety of ways, but it should always be balanced. Okay. So when we look at our detailed fund activity report, we're going to omit accounts with our zero balances. We're going to come back and talk about some of these other columns here in a minute, or tabs, but we're just going to look at it. And Church Windows requires that our balance sheet be in balance at all times. Now, again, if you call me and say, hey, Josh, I've got the wrong balances in the wrong accounts, that's a different problem. But your overall balance sheet totals, in this case, total assets, as we see here, either in the beginning balance or total in year-to-date column, is that total assets figure must equal the total liabilities and fund balance figure at the bottom of our report. So if I, go, okay, $1,837,025 and change, I go down to the bottom, $1,837,025 and change. It's the same figure, and it's true in the year-to-date column too. If yours doesn't balance overall, then we need to hear from you, okay? Now, notice I didn't choose anything special on that report. I just ran it, through today or through March, including my beginning balances. All right? So the beginning balances up here, the column right up here at the very top, beginning balances, that's a column I've added to the report. That represents what our beginning balances were as of January 1, or whatever your starting day and month is of your accounting year. If you're on a fiscal year, it's going to be the first day of your fiscal accounting year at midnight. Okay? Those are the beginning balances. Those are generally brought forward from the ending balances of our balance sheet from the prior year. Okay? So if you have, once you have, have opened a second accounting year in Church Windows accounting, those ending balances for the prior year balance sheet, say run through December, should always equal the beginning balances for our balance sheet for the next year. Okay? If they don't, that could be potentially a problem, and oftentimes is. Certainly with regards to where things like reporting is concerned, and absolutely as far as the bank reconciliation is concerned. Okay? There are some options here that are important to talk about. I can run it for a particular month or through a particular date, but we do also have some, the detailed fund activity report, but we also have some other formats. So we do have our monthly comparative and our annual comparative. Okay? So basically what this is telling us is that this does change some of the information columns based on, what we're including, or based on that annual or monthly comparative. Okay? You can choose or set up custom groups for your balance sheet if you wish, but again, you have to be careful that depending on the accounts that you've brought in, you may or may not see a balanced balance sheet, depending on how those accounts are treated and what they are for and what they do. Okay? Our columns definitely offers us the greatest amount of flexibility. So here we have, generally by default, we're going to have like account number, account name, beginning balance, year to date. Year to date is going to be the year to date totals through the month or the period that we've chosen. But notice we do have other options like period activity. So in this case, period activity would represent a month, or our previous year to date or previous period balance. Okay? So you can do either an annual or period comparison to the same period or year-to-date balance through that month from the prior year or to the prior year. Okay? And it will also allow us to include amount difference per the period balance or the period activity column in comparison to that, or the percent difference year-to-date and the percent difference period. Okay? Those kind of columns go hand in hand with one another. Okay? If you wish to prefer to see no account detail on these on the balance sheet, we can basically say, okay, we don't want to see any of the accounts. We want to see just our subtotals. Once we uncheck that detail box, notice here, shows all of our subtotals, no accounts, but the balance sheet equation is still in play. Okay? Only reports on assets, liabilities, and funds. We never see any treasurer's report accounts or income and expense accounts on our balance sheet, which kind of is a nice segue into our treasurer's report. Okay? So if we close out of our balance sheet and we now go to back up to our reports and export, financial, we're going to choose treasurer's report. This is the report that is even probably more commonly used than our balance sheet. This is our income expense statement, our profit and loss, treasurer's report, whatever you decide to call it. It is the report that reports on our income and expense accounts only, nothing else. We won't see any asset totals, no fund balances, no liabilities, just income and expense accounts only. This is also the report, of course, that we would oftentimes, or we will, compare our actual income and expense totals for the period or for the year to our budget. We can run our reports. We could do this on our balance sheet too. It's going to default to my current accounting year, but I do like to remind folks we can run a report for a prior year all while remaining in the current accounting year. We don't have to change our year back on any of the reports anymore to run them for a prior year. We're going to do it for 18. Again, I can include or omit accounts with zero balances. I can run a treasurer's report based on those income and expenses that are linked to a specific fund. So if I go, okay, I want to see just my income and expenses on my treasurer's report for my general operating fund, I would choose that fund. All the other income and expenses that are linked to other funds would be omitted automatically. So the report period, of course, is going to be either for a month or you can run it for a quarter. So in this case, the column called period activity is going to represent either that month you've selected or the quarter you've chosen, depending on which report period button you've selected. Okay. You can also ask the system to display an asterisk for any over budget items as well. Frankly, it's a nice easy way to tell when accounts are over budget. Personally, I think it's a little over dramatic on there. I can definitely tell when an account's over budget and when it's not, so I generally don't check that, but by all means, if it helps you folks, it does. Great, add it. I again can create a custom grouping of accounts to be able to run for my treasurer's report. But again, much like we saw on our balance sheet, probably one of the most powerful columns on here is tabs on here is our columns tab. All right. So again, this is where we're going to see, a lot of times folks go, well, why don't I have I don't have an option under my period report as year to date. You don't, because that's one of the columns. So once you choose either the month or the quarter, the column here called year-to-date balance is going to be the total for the full year through that ending month or quarter. Okay? So yeah, it's a column that you select to add. By default, it's added to the report. But again, you're going to typically see things like account number, account name, year-to-date balance, maybe annual budget. You folks decide, you and your church decide what information columns or what information is most useful to you. Okay? But one of the things I like to kind of stress about our treasurer's report, of course, is, year-to-date balance is generally only going to be suitable when we're comparing it to any year-to-date budget columns. Okay? So my year-to-date balance column is not going to balance very well with my column called budget month, percent of budget month, okay? Because that's a monthly budget column, and therefore it's not meant to compare to a year-to-date column, okay? So frequently you can match up these columns in terms of how they report, and frequently the totals will be completely off and they won't make logical sense because we haven't compared or haven't added and put the columns that are appropriate to one another next to one another. So right here, period activity and monthly budget, yes, if I run it for a specific month, that period activity will be the actual for that month, and it should draw a really accurate comparison to its monthly budget. But that wouldn't be true if I chose period activity and I compared it to budget, annual budget, or maybe budget year to date. Okay, they're not meant to report next to one another. So generally you can match up year to date with annual columns. You can tie period activity columns to anything that refers to, in this case, monthly or quarterly. Okay, but you decide. What I tell folks frequently is, hey, go ahead and add all these columns. If you're unsure what your committee might find helpful, add them all. Just move them all over to your columns on the right-hand side and, reorder them using the up and down arrows on the right side here, pairing them up appropriately, okay? and then print it and give it to your committee and say, hey, I don't know what columns are important or helpful to you. Let me know before the next meeting what columns you want me to include, and I'll omit all the rest, and I'll give you the report you want. Okay? They won't know what you have available to you in church windows until you show them. So just having done this as long as I have, that's just a little bit of, I hope, a little bit of wisdom that I can pass on to you about it. Okay? But then, yes, once we click, yes, you've got a detail tab too. So if, again, we don't want to see, any of the income or expense accounts, and we only want, I actually work with churches that prefer this report versus one of the more detailed ones with all of the accounts. It really varies from one church or user to the next. You can pick and choose which columns or which ones you show details for and which ones you don't. So if I go, okay, I want to say I don't want to show my salaries and benefits expenses. Don't want anybody to see anybody's compensation. Once we click on print, it shows all of our income and expenses, and then we see one general big subtotal for all of our salaries and benefits for all employees. Okay, don't see any one employee's actual earnings and what have you, their budgeted amounts. Okay, you have a lot of flexibility here, folks. Okay, with about 4 minutes left, the last report I think we're going to be able to have time to cover here is our fund activity report. This is now going on to our page 25 of our workbook topics there. Folks, if you don't have the workbooks, you can always, of course, go online to our website and purchase those at churchwindows.com. We try to pair the webinars with those as much as humanly possible. But our fund activity report, it is a report that is probably one of the most useful reports for your distributing to your committees or your board or your trustees or whomever. Why? Because it exclusively reports on the funds on the balance sheet or non-church windows. It doesn't do anything to do with assets or liabilities or anything. It just tells us what happened in a fund for a particular period of time. Okay? So by default, there are three report formats here. We've got, under format, we've got detailed, consolidated, selected month, consolidated year to date. The detailed report is the one that shows basically all of the income and expenses. If you include accounts with zero balance, it's probably going to add on a fairly long amount of length to the report. But it literally, in this case, for our, since our general operating fund is our first fund that's listed in the funds, it shows the beginning balance for the current activity, or in this case, the month. So our month started with $91,000 in it, but in our year to date, we actually started with $73,000 in there. And then it shows the same thing for our, income accounts. And then as we scroll down, it eventually moves into our expenses, and it shows each of those expense account totals. And then it shows, when I get down here, it's a long report. Gets down to our ending fund balance down here, where it shows where we ended for the month or for the year. Okay? It'll even show any debit or credit transfers in here as well if we posted transfers or moved money or journal entered money directly between different funds. Okay? This is a very helpful report from the standpoint that if I go, okay, well, what if I want to run it for one fund? You go, okay, I've got my my building fund committee or my mission fund committee. I want them just to see this, their accounts only, nothing else, their fund. I can just go to the funds tab, remove everything else, add their fund, click on print, and then it should bring up all of their accounts only, omitting all the rest, he said confidently. Not sure why it's not. Sorry, folks. All right, well, while we're trying to see if we can't wait for that to generate here, there's a question. Where do I find the detail of an expense account and the detail of the fund? That would probably be your general ledger report, Joan. We're not going to talk about that today, but that would probably be your general ledger or your transaction journal. Good question. All right, I'm sorry, folks. I'm not sure why this is not coming up for this. Let's try this again. Yeah, I'm not sure why it's not generating the preview on this, folks. Let's try a different fund. I think this worked on one of the others. Let's maybe try, well, we saw our general fund before. I was just trying to show something a little bit shorter, a little bit less convoluted with regards to that. So before we wrap things up here, we've got about another minute or so, Personally, one of my favorite reports in Church Windows accounting, in Church Windows overall, are our consolidated fund activity reports. Either selected month or personally the year to date is one of my favorites. Okay. If we, I've got to select all. Sorry, folks. All right, so consolidated, we're going to include accounts with zero balances. I'm really hoping it pops up this time. There it is. Woohoo! Okay, so this is in one single page report, a report that paints the picture of our funds in one simple line. Here's where we started the year for the fund. Here's where our total receipts or income. Here are our total expenses or disbursements, our debit or credit journal entry or transfers, and our current fund balance. It doesn't get any simpler than this, folks. It really paints the whole picture based on the linking of the income and expenses to those funds, where they are, not only on an individual fund basis, but where we are on a whole year. So this, when a church tells me, wow, our expenses are exceeding or why is our fund in a negative status for the year? One of the first things I do is take them to this report and I say, how do your receipts compare to your disbursements? And they go, oh, well, our disbursements are, $50,000 and our receipts are only $40,000. Well, there you go. There's a deficit in terms of income to expenses. So just an FYI, these consolidated fund activity reports are some of my personal favorites because, again, they really paint a very clear picture in one simple single page. All right, I've gone about a minute long, folks. I apologize for that. I hope it's been helpful. If you have questions, please type those into the questions portion of the webinar. And if you have, of course, other support questions, ones that you need to have answered by support, please contact our support staff. We're happy to help. All right, so I'm going to give folks here a few seconds here to type something in and see if there's any other questions I can answer about these reports. If not, of course, again, please use the file menu and choose Exit Leave Webinar. We hope to see you. I'll be doing the webinar tomorrow too, so if you're joining us for that, you'll be getting me there as well. I hope that's okay. All right, it looks like folks are diving out pretty quickly. I don't see any questions coming in. I just don't want, I know sometimes it can be a little lengthy to type those in there, so I don't want to cut folks off here prematurely. But I don't see anything coming in. It looks like everybody's kind of diving out pretty quickly. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar for everybody. If, again, you have questions, please contact us or call us at support. I hope it's been helpful again, and we'll look forward to seeing you at another Church Windows webinar event. All right. Thank you all. Take care. Bye-bye.